Hi, I'm Catherine.
And I'm Teresa.
And we are the co-authors of the book, Pass the Baton, Empowering All Music Students.
Our goal is to share stories of educators who are passing the baton and empowering their music students. We want to help teachers create music lessons that transform students from passive consumers to vibrant creatives. Welcome back to the Pass the Baton podcast. We're here to talk about all things student empowerment in music education. Before we introduce today's guest, we want to remind you to follow or subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss any future episodes.
In addition, if you like what you hear today, please consider leaving a rating or review. That's what helps podcasts like Pass the Baton grow. Well, Teresa, I made a new friend today, which is really nice to get to know Elise. She's just got so much, she's so great to listen to, and she's got so much knowledge to share with everybody. And she lives close to me. So I've got a new friend.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I really liked how, she was talking about things that are, pretty deep, this idea of making sure that we're really reaching all of our students. But she also made it very accessible.
Yeah.
And it's also fun that she mentioned that word of access so often, about us providing access for all of our students, but really she was helping us provide, provide access for all the teachers.
All right. Welcome back, everybody. We're glad you could join us. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Elise Hackl-Blumstein. So Elise, thanks for being with us today.
You're welcome. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, it's kind of fun that I've just kind of recently learned how close we actually are to each other, which is so nice.
And neighbors. Yep.
Yeah. And I've recently had some time to look at some of your work, but maybe you could just introduce yourself a little bit and share with everyone some of the work that you're doing.
Absolutely. So I've been what was once called an adaptive music teacher, now accessible music teacher for almost the last decade. And currently I am a student services coordinator, making sure that all students get their needs met. So working with IEPs, especially coaching all of our specials teachers, including art, music, and PE. So I've had a realm of knowledge around that preschool through 8th grade. And then I also have created an accessible arts organization focused on accessibility in all arts with my husband, who's also a musician. So this is really our jam. We love access, we love music, and we love making sure that everybody can participate in music.
Yeah. That's so wonderful.
Yeah, I love it. So in hearing some of the work that you've done, we've heard you talk about universal design for learning. And that's actually, we had a teeny little bit about that in Pass the Baton, but maybe could you tell us more, like really what is UDL and, how's it going to impact our music students?
Absolutely. And especially, I know we've been talking about post-COVID, the way that our students learn has really changed. Universal design, if you take anything away from this, is all about multiple means, multiple ways of doing things. So there are 3 main areas of universal design where we talk about engagement, action, and expression and representation. And to give a little bit more about what those mean, when we're talking about engagement, we're talking about keeping interest and self-regulation and making sure that students can sustain something. When we're talking about representation, we're talking about comprehension and making sure that they understand all of our symbols, especially in music. We have a lot of those. And then action and expression could be physical actions, but also really, for me, it comes down to communication and executive functioning. And basically, when we think about universal design, it's a way of making sure that our spaces are accessible from the get-go. So though there are going to be accommodations and modifications for specific students, it's making sure that even students that don't have IEPs, students that are coming to us from any background, has access. The biggest question I get is, okay, I don't have any students with IEPs or 504s in my class, but everybody still needs access. Accessibility isn't just for people with disabilities, it is for everybody. We all had accommodations when we were out. Some of us worked from home, some of us were able to come to school, and we had to do what we could do to engage. And that's what UDL is about. It's about finding ways for everybody to be able to be part of the conversation or the class or the activity. It's kind of general overview.
Yeah, I like that, especially how you reinforce that it's for everybody. I think when I was first introduced to the idea of UDL, people talked about like a ramp going into a building. Yes, that can help somebody who has mobility problems, but it can also help someone pushing a stroller or someone carrying heavy packages, or if you're just tired that day.
Exactly.
And Yeah, I love that idea.
Yeah. And I think we also get so tied up in, we have, this one way that we've taught this lesson forever. And when we're able to break it down and get a new idea to utilize in our lessons, we're able to meet so many more students. If you think about your experiences teaching, there's always a student that doesn't want to do something exactly the way that we have it in our plans, and that's okay. But they can still engage with what we're doing if we present it in a different way. And so, especially for my students, I talk a lot about communication and representation because those are areas in which my students have the most challenges. So if we're doing an activity and they don't understand the activity, how am I communicating that to them? It's often thinking about students as not choosing to not participate, but not having the access to participate. So that really is what universal design is all about. And I know we've had a big push, especially with diversity, equity, inclusion, and access, which is rightful. It's taken a little too long for us to get here, to be honest. But thinking about that access piece, we don't want our students to come in and have to feel othered or have to feel different. And when we're able to set our students up with access from the beginning, I know I keep saying that, but it's so important to be ingrained. They don't feel othered. They feel like the music room is a safe space for them, or whatever class they're in is a safe space. And our ultimate goal is to provide a space where students can become musicians, or maybe they won't become musicians, but they will become consumers of music when they are older. And we want to make sure that we are continuing to provide them with opportunity so that they will always have music in their life. And to me, that's what UDL is really all about.
Yeah. So what if we start with just, you're coming from an educator who's like, yeah, I don't think I have, I don't know what's the word I want to say. I have peers that are very homogeneous. So where do you start when you want to just make sure that you're opening more access to just your general population?
Yeah. And it really does. I know you've talked about this too previously, come down to voice and choice. But when we think about UDL, it's not just the way that we would typically think about voice and choice. It's remembering that everybody has a voice and we're there to support it. But sometimes that means that we have to give processing time or wait time for students to be able to understand what the question we're asking is. Sometimes I have to give them a visual cue. I can't speak it. Sometimes I have to understand that the way that they're going to express their feedback, their receptive, is going to be different than the way that I would speak to them. So in my classroom, we use a lot of communication boards. If you are familiar with Boardmaker, it's a picture exchange system, basically where any word that I might say, I could have a picture for it. My music room, we have every instrument, tempo. There's a specific purple color in all of our classrooms for music related content, where if I'm speaking to a student, I can use that board to show them what I'm saying. The great other tool is that it slows my speech. I'm a fast talker. That's part of who I am. And that allows them to have the processing time to be able to even be in that conversation. So as much as we want to say, okay, I'm giving students a voice in the music that they're choosing, sometimes they need choices, literal choices of 1,000 pieces is too overwhelming. So here's 3 that we could use for today. Or it's a free day and we're going to use Chrome Music Lab today, but that's overwhelming. And I don't know what Chrome Music Lab is, and I haven't used that before. So maybe we have some video examples they can explore ahead of time. Giving them different solutions and different means, again, that multiple means of that voice and choice is a great place to start. It's a really kind of a tricky concept because it's something that we know we all want to do and we all are trying our best to incorporate it. And the more you break it down, the more we see, oh, there are 1,000 options here and it's going to be different for every student. And that's okay. That's what's great about it.
Yeah. And I think, go ahead, Teresa.
Oh, I was just going to say, that's interesting that you talk about that with choice as far as having too many options. I think we fall into that trap a lot with creativity and music. We expect we can just say, make something, and that the students will be able to then, create. But by almost limiting their options, they have more capability to be creative and to really think and dig into the tools as opposed to being just frozen with all those options. So that's such an interesting way to think about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think I already take objection to my first question, because I think after I hear myself say that, I'm like, there is no same thinker, right? There is no same thinker in your classroom. And so, so you do have to think about the variety of different ways that you can offer, visuals and directions and all those things and choices, because they don't think like me, They don't.
Exactly. And I think the great thing about universal design is we're doing a lot of this stuff already without really realizing. If we look at like the National Core Art Standards, the way that they're written is built for universal design. As you're younger, it's with heavy guidance. And as you get older, it's less guidance. And then it's independence. And then we're really diving in that scaffolding level. That's what universal design is. So I know in my district, we were having a couple of years ago, standards-based grading. So we're grading all of our students based on the music standards, which are reflective of the National Core Art Standards. And we got into a conversation because our second grade standard was singing and ostinato specifically, which does align with the National Core Art Standards, being able to play or recognize an ostinato. However, we got stuck on the word singing because we have some students that are non-speaking. So what does that look like? And is it okay for them to be able to hit a switch that sings the ostinato? Can they arrange the ostinato? Can they show me which piece of music reflects it accurately? Is that still assessing the same thing? So just thinking about all of the ways in which we can do that can bring in so many more students. So though this student can't physically sing, they can recognize in my voice, that was not the ostinato that we were playing. That's not what's written. They can arrange notes on a sheet of paper to show, oh, that is what the ostinato looks like. So thinking about the ways in which we offer guidance to have students meet their goals is also really within universal design. I know we talk about accommodations and modifications, which are some questions that a lot of people ask, what are they and what's the difference? And, they're used kind of interchangeably. The way I like to think about it is that the accommodation is how we are doing something. So our end goal is still the same. We are all going to be composing a 16-beat pattern, but there are so many different ways to get there. And when we think about all of the composers that we know, Beethoven didn't compose the same way that Lizzo does. They don't compose the same way that Stevie Wonder, everybody composes in different ways. So why are we limiting ourselves to pencil and paper writing out a 16-beat measure? And what is that really assessing too? Because sometimes that's assessing, can I draw a whole note, which maybe I can't, but I can tell you what it is and I can tell you how long it lasts and I can tell you if it's in place in this measure. So just thinking about all those pieces, and it really opens the doors to all of the music technology that we had, making sure that we're recognizing the backgrounds of every individual, again, not just in ability or disability, but also in cultural backgrounds and the way in which they were raised, and providing access and all the resources that they had growing up. So again, universal design is for everyone.
Yeah. Well, and you're talking about figuring out what is the purpose of what we're doing. Is the purpose to show that the student can draw a circle whole note, or is the purpose that the student really understands what that means musically? And how they show that is going to be very different. My wheels are turning.
Well, that's good. That's what it's about, right? It's about having the conversations and recognizing, we're not going to walk into this and day one have a solution for every single student, but being able to meet one more student and provide one more musical experience so that later in life, it provides access to one more experience for their children or their families, or they're able to go see a show, or maybe they are, the next virtuoso and they're going to be conducting a symphony. Who knows? But giving those experiences in a way that's meaningful. It's also really important to think about the way in which music is created today. Yeah. And I know we talked about technology. Anybody can pick up an instrument. Anybody can use a computer to play any instrument. Mm-hmm. Something that was really unique in my school, I realize is a little bit more unique, is we have eye gaze to communicate. So students will have devices that they use eye gaze to speak on. We also were able to set that up with Chrome Music Lab so they could use eye gaze to compose. Wow. It's still a valid song, and anybody listening to it would never know how it was created. It's still a song. Yeah. So it again comes to really that voice choice and empowerment.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And I think what I hear you saying too is when you come up, when you have those situations where you're like, wait, what am I going to do? How am I going to, help this learner or give access to this learner? I hear you keep saying, like, what can we do? Just like kind of looking for the cans in the situation. And I think, like you said, I helped this student last year and I worked on this with this student the year before, and that's going to help me with the next student I meet next year, right? We just kind of keep building on these experiences. And while something might not work the same for somebody else, it's still pushing me forward and giving me more tools for the different learners that are going to come in my room.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that aligns totally with Teresa, you were saying about goals, right? What's that ultimate goal? And really, with every lesson that we teach, we should know what our goal is for our students. Again, it doesn't matter how they reach it. So if my goal, and usually mine is to become an independent individual who participates in music class, I want you to be as independent as possible. I don't care if you're reading music that's color coded. I don't. You're playing a song. I don't care if you've memorized it and you're playing it back to me. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
I don't care if you're using a non-traditional instrument, if you're using non-traditional notation. I don't care how you do it, as long as you're doing it and it's meaningful to you.
Yeah.
And that's a big piece. Another way that I like to really draw in representation is with manipulatives. And I know we've really been working towards that. Lots of music rooms now you're seeing, let's go to the dollar store, go to Target and get those little chips so we can draw out rhythms. It's okay to have those and to utilize them in multiple formats. It's okay to repeat using manipulatives. It's okay if a student has to have a sheet of paper that has the staff labeled for them to be able to place notes. It's still making music. And that's all in accommodation. They're still reaching the same goal, just in a different way.
Well, and with those goals, I mean, you said the word a few minutes ago, empowerment. My goal is for the students to take ownership and to feel like they are musicians, not only when they're in the classroom, but when they're outside of the classroom, when they're out in the world, at home, all of those things. And it sounds like you're not just saying, okay, well, we're going to do this so I can assess you this way. You're giving these students tools. And It's with those tools that they're going to be musicians.
And it's great that you say that, because even thinking about, our young students, they're people. Everybody that's in our class is a person. Mm-hmm. And I think we forget sometimes, as we think we're the adults in the room, that sometimes my kindergartner is going to know something that I don't.
Oh, yeah.
And sometimes my fourth grader is going to be smarter at this than I am, and that's okay. And now I'm going to take it to talking a little bit more about our students with disabilities. But sometimes, we want to do what is best for them, and we don't want them to go through any othering or any pain. And though our intentions are great, when we say, okay, I know it's a little hard for you to move in this activity because you have to get your walker out, we're not giving them that empowerment. And I'll draw an example. One of my first classes that I ever taught was a junior high class, and it's a class of students that had a lot of medical needs. So lots of seizures, and a nurse with them full time. And somebody walked into the room and walked up to a seventh grader and just started going, "Oh, you're so cute. It's so good to see you." And like a 3-year-old. And the seventh grader is rolling her eyes in her chair, sitting there. And I just said to her, "Do you like when she talks to you like that?" And she immediately hits a switch and goes, "No." So I'm like, okay. Then the adult goes out of the room and she immediately hits yes. It's just, people are people and want to be treated like people. And when we can use tools like universal design, we can provide that tool that says, "You're welcome here. I see your differences. I recognize them. I appreciate them. And we're going to make this work for you."
Yeah.
And I know we're not really talking about SEL today, but as we're talking, we can kind of hear how this UDL and SEL are a perfect partnership. It's about that empowerment, that identity, that belonging, as SEL is becoming such a huge, rightfully, buzzword in all of our schools, making sure that it's embedded in what we're doing. Using UDL is going to make SEL happen in your classrooms.
Yeah. And just like we found, using that helps student ownership happen too. They all go together.
Exactly. And now we're talking about ownership a little bit. And I think as we move to talk more about people with disabilities in the classroom, the more music teachers I talk to that are really starting to have more of these self-contained classes, which are just classes with people with disabilities in them, the more concern I'm seeing a little bit in teachers, understandably so. We don't have a ton of programs yet that really give us the tools that we need or the resources we need. But I think that teachers forget that we are not alone in meeting the needs of our students with disabilities. We have an IEP team, we have speech pathologists, we have occupational therapists, physical therapists. We can ask them, and we should be asking them about the accommodations that the students typically would get. And I know in Illinois, I get questions a lot of, well, should I have access to somebody's IEP? Yes, you are servicing them. You should have access to their IEP. And the great thing is, as we're thinking about universal design, the accommodations are already listed for the student in their IEP. So we can take those accommodations and tie them into our activities, use them together to provide the best possible outcomes for our students. So when I think about accommodations, I often think about the social implications from our students, any physical implications or challenges, and then academic as well. And I like to phrase them as almost expectations that we have of our students. So in order to complete this task, it's expected that students are going to do X, Y, and Z. So if, let's say I'm doing a 5th grade composition and I want them to perform a solo, the expectation is that socially they'll be prepared to present a solo in front of their peers and myself after playing. Academically, they have to be able to read and create the composition. And then physically, if they're playing an instrument, can they hold mallets? Can they hold whatever they're playing? So breaking down each of those areas to understand, okay, socially, are they prepared? Are they able to do this? Do they have a challenge, whether it's in an IEP or not? Do they just have performance anxiety? And is that something that I can help them with? Do they have to present it in front of me in the whole class? Can they record it at home? Can they record it in a corner? Can they play it for me after class? Can they play it with the group? They're still doing the goal, which is a performance. It just might not be that exact moment at that exact time. And that's only the social aspect, right? Then we also have that academic piece. Well, if they can't memorize this piece of music, can they have a guide? Something that I talked about with another music teacher recently was reading music in our performances and compositions. Yeah. And when we think about at least for me, every band concert that I've been to, the musicians have the music in front of them. Every orchestra performance, musicians have it. Not as much in choir, which, we're getting there, but why can't students have that guide in front of them? It's just a little bit more guidance to make sure that they're successful. We all use guidance. I'm using notes right now of the things that I jotted down for this conversation.
Us too.
As long as it helps us to be able to participate and feel the best that we can feel, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the big question to ask as we're thinking about how can we make sure that students are initially set up for success.
Yeah.
So lots of ways that it ties in.
And I think you were, when I heard you talking about, like, music teachers aren't alone in this conversation. Like, there are so many people in your building that know your student well as well, sometimes more because they see them every day, all day long, right? And we get to see them only so much in a week, but like you don't have to figure out these things all by yourself. And I think there's so much power in just walking down the hall and saying, like, I'm going to start recording. I'm just thinking this might be a way, to help the student. And they might totally agree or totally be like, what, that's restricting. I think it's too restricting. Let's try this. So, I mean, it's just so much can come from a great conversation, and you don't have to do it by yourself.
Yeah. And it's okay if it doesn't go well the first time.
Yeah.
We've all had those lessons that, they crash immediately, and we say, okay, I learned and I'm going to do better next time. And I think really that vulnerability piece too, of talking to your students, saying, listen, I tried this and you are just way smarter. I underestimated you. So let's do something different next time. And that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is totally okay to say that.
Yeah. I was just going to ask, do you ever have the conversations with students about this and seek their input? And what's that like?
Yeah. So something that's really cool about my position is I work with so many different students with so many different backgrounds. So for my junior high students, part of their program, it's a social emotional program, is to really understand their needs. That's a goal for a lot of them in their IEPs. Mm-hmm. So we will look at something, and as something starts to get hard, we'll say, well, what is challenging about this? What are the next step that you need? And for these students, it really does go back to those expectations of them saying, you've told me this, I just don't understand what you mean. So for example, if I had a rubric, we were doing a music history project where they were researching a performer, having example slides of the slideshow that they were going to put together, world of difference. I would do my presentation of my performer first, so they have a reference. World of difference. And I don't care if they're able to find 12-point font on their own. I don't really care that they're able to, sort these pages in a certain order. I want them to find the songs that are meaningful to them, be able to express why. So some of them typed up a presentation, sent it to me and pressed play. Some of them said, the keyboarding is really hard for me. I want to draw a picture and tell you about the picture. And it was great. It was exactly what it was supposed to be. And some of them went to YouTube and created an entire playlist and tried to link it to their TikToks, which, a whole other ball game. But again, it's that level of finding out what the student needs and who really knows us better than ourselves.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
it might take a lot of practice, but that's okay.
But it's another example of voice and choice too, right? And I think a lot of times when we talk about voice and choice, that becomes that ultimate goal, is that the students are able to set the learning path. But even in this case, like, they're setting what they think their next goal should be and how they should get there, things like that. And it's neat to hear you talk about that working, and that, students being able to do that.
Yeah. And I think that brings up another great question when we're talking about students with disabilities who might be having meltdowns in the music room, or what some people would deem as behaviors in the music classroom. Really, behavior is communication. So that's a student expressing to you that they don't have access to what we're doing. So with our younger students, where they might be in that mode, they might not be able to tell us what they need yet. And that's okay. So when we talk about those choices, it's helping them to learn the process of choice making for themselves. So modeling, here are 2 things that we could do right now that I think, based on what I know about you, will help you. And then utilizing the one that they choose can be okay. Or even, they're not in a place where they're ready to communicate that yet. And that's okay. Saying, I'm going to pick this one for you. Oh, didn't work. Okay, let's try this other one. Didn't work. Okay, we'll try again tomorrow, or whatever time is left. And again, it's okay to fail, as long as we are trying our best to do the best for our students. We're never going to be perfect. We're never going to be able to have 30 individualized lessons for every single student at every single activity throughout the day. And that's okay. But you will find that when we do some of these activities, for example, making manipulatives for some of my students, I had no idea that other students really enjoyed that and were able to create a much longer pattern than they would have been able to had I not had manipulatives. You'll find out some really cool strengths from other students when we start to integrate multiple means of engaging.
Yeah, I think that's some of the joy of teaching too, when you just keep trying, and then there's the day that you hit it out of the ballpark, and it keeps you going for all the other times it doesn't work out, right? But it's just so cool when you end up finally making that connection. Yeah, it's worth it. So,
and I throw out a potential, like, devil's advocate.
Yeah.
That you've probably heard, that I know of, I've heard before. But what if a student who doesn't need an accommodation takes one?
So what? So what? They maybe need it in that moment. I hear this a lot, especially as we talk about fidget spinners, right? Have been a huge thing in our schools, and Pop-Its last year. There are times that, yes, okay, I understand that you don't want them to have that because they're supposed to be doing something else, and that is actively inhibiting what they're supposed to be doing. But if they have a Pop-It, but they're still singing and participating in your class, does it really matter?
Mm-hmm.
I think no, but that's just me. And maybe, I know for me, sometimes there are sensory tools that are inhibiting me from being able to do what I'm supposed to do. And having that conversation with a student and saying, listen, I know you love this. It's very hard for me because this is distracting for me. It's not about you. It's about me. Can I take this and put this to the side, and you can have it again at the end of this activity? 9 times out of 10, they say yes. And if they don't, it's probably because they really do have an underlying need that we just haven't found out yet. So I'm a firm believer that a child will do what they can. And if they are not able to, it's because they can't.
Yeah. And I think too, when kids, have a day and they choose a path that wasn't the best for them, they also most of the time can own up to that, and say, like, yeah, I goofed around today, or whatever. And that's you don't want that to happen all the time, but I hear what you're saying too. Like, kids don't choose to do that all the time. But then you can have that learning conversation then and move forward, like, we all make those. Either we're having a day, and that's fine too, or we just make those mistakes or make those choices, but we just acknowledge it and move on.
Exactly. And I think that's such a powerful thing, especially because when we think of access, we really think about that safe space for that empowerment. But unless we have our safe space, we can't feel empowered if we don't feel comfortable. Mm-hmm. So having those conversations and building that rapport with students, and that, I see you over here, and maybe you didn't need that today, or maybe you started off on the wrong foot. That's okay. I'm not going to judge you. You're not going to be in trouble, but let's try something different tomorrow and see if that works out. They're going to feel okay. They're going to feel okay to fail in front of you and feel safe when that inevitably happens. Because again, we all do. Mm-hmm. We all make mistakes. And as long as we're with people that we feel secure around, that's okay. Mm-hmm. It's about providing those spaces.
Yeah. So if someone listening is thinking, all right, I want to make some changes, but like tomorrow, what's something little, what's like a bite-sized start that a music teacher could do in their classroom?
Yeah, I think I'm going to go for kind of one for each of those three main areas that we talked about within universal design. So when we're thinking about that action and that expression, even just looking at your activity that you have for the day and seeing, can all my students physically do this? Mm-hmm. Or what even is the physical expectation? I know there have been many times that I've been working with teachers where we're doing like a folk dance or a circle song, and we get there and we realize, oh, this student's wheelchair does not back up appropriately for this song. And we realize it in the moment. And that's okay. Again, another time for us to try something different the next time, but just looking at it through the lens of what are the expectations here for my student is a great place to start. And then on that comprehension piece, remembering that we all take in information in different ways, even those of us that are speaking. Sometimes we need a visual. It's just like being in a foreign country. When we see that restroom sign, we know it's a restroom, no matter what else it says. So anytime that we are giving a new symbol or speaking about something in depth, like maybe introducing a composer, having a visual to go along with it and help build that comprehension can be much more helpful. So that's even just, one small thing. If you're giving a directive, having a visual with it. I love schedules. I am a person that if I know what we're doing and what's coming next, I'm going to be along for the ride and I'm going to get excited about it. And something that's so wonderful about music is we don't always have to have that kind of scheduled time. It almost flows like a story in a lot of our classrooms. But when we know what's coming next, we're going to be more likely to participate with enthusiasm. So if you're somebody that doesn't necessarily have a schedule on the board, that's okay, but maybe just letting the students know what you're doing today as you introduce the lesson. We all have lesson plans. We know what we're doing. Why can't we share them with students? I know personally for me, one of the best things that ever happened was in college. I was in a choir where our instructor would send us all the pieces we were working on and all of the measures for the next 2 weeks. It was wonderful because when I practiced, I would learn those measures from 2 weeks from now, and then I would be ready. And truthfully, we got so much more done because everybody was practicing those measures ahead of time. If we were going to be out, we knew exactly what we had to work on. Expectations are great, but when we all know what goes into it, we're able to participate more. So I think those would be kind of the three big things. And just thinking about the ways in which we engage with music and seeing, does this child engage the same way that I do?
Yeah.
And kind of observing what they are interested in and what they are doing. Is there something they're not doing and why? What's the why behind why they're not participating? Is it a physical thing? Is it academic? Is it social? Is this too easy for them? That's another thing about universal design. We often think about, well, we have to kind of pare it down to meet the needs of a lot of our students, but that's not true. Sometimes we have to make it a little bit harder or just different. And it doesn't necessarily need to be easier or harder. It's just different, and that's okay.
Yeah. Those are such great examples because like you could do them tomorrow. So thank you. That was perfect.
Yeah.
So I imagine all of this that you're talking about today cannot be done without relationships. Because you have to, like you said, you have to observe, you have to listen, you have to know your kids to know what their next step might be when they're not able to tell you or, et cetera. So how do you build relationships with your students
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think we keep saying voice and choice and empowerment, but it really does all come down to that. If you are somebody who, is coming into a role in a new position, or you have a struggling student that has just come in and you don't know them, look at their IEP if they have one, talk to their team, talk to their teachers, and even just get to know a little bit about the student. If you're listening and you have students with IEPs or 504s and you have no idea what I'm talking about, just pause this and go ask your case managers for an at a glance page. They should be giving you just a quick page about the student, their needs, their goals, and their accommodations. And if you're talking about, again, anybody that needs access, observing somebody and asking them is a great place to start. Even if you think that they don't know, give them the benefit of the doubt first. And then if we decide, okay, they have expressed to me that they don't know, then we can try giving those options. But always give students the benefit of the doubt. And that wait time, I think, is a big part of it, because we assume when we don't hear, at least I do, if I don't hear somebody respond immediately, I'm like, oh, did I say something wrong? Are they listening? Did they hear me? Let me say it 20 more times. And then we have to start the process all over again because I've lost what I asked them initially. And that sometimes happens with our students. I know I have some that if you don't say the question in the exact same way, it's almost like you asked a different question. Mm-hmm. So we just have to keep repeating it, and writing it down for that student really made a difference because they could just read it themselves. So I think really working with that team initially, observing what the student is doing. And if you're somebody that has centers in your room, walking around during those centers and seeing, does the student like the listening center? Are they using more of the hands-on materials? Are they doing better when individual or in a group? Are they gravitating towards certain instruments or away from others? Am I seeing them hold mallets correctly? Am I seeing them hold the ukulele correctly? All of those pieces can help to understand them, and then communicating with what they're doing. Something that we do with early childhood students is really that play together, but not necessarily dictating play. You'll see this oftentimes with like 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds where, they're playing with farm animals and you say, oh, you have a cow. What does a cow say? But we can also just point to it and say, cow, moo, moo. And they might start to pick up on that as opposed to those questioning. Mm-hmm. So sometimes, it's like me and my husband do this where we want to be in the same room, but not talking to each other the whole time. Building those moments for connection and understanding that we all connect in different ways. And that's okay. Yeah. So once we get used to each other, starting to warm up, starting to engage, maybe through questions, but also through experiences. We don't have to be asking questions to get to know somebody. Mm-hmm. We don't have to be speaking to get to know somebody. We can be playing keys on a piano together. It can turn into a game, but I said no words, and that's okay. Once we get there and students can see that they can be around you, that they can feel safe, then we can start to have those conversations about what do you need? I'm able to provide it. They feel like they're getting what they need. We're able to work together, and we're able to come up with a solution that really impacts the rest of their musical lives, which is a really cool thing.
Yeah. And I think something that we say, and I know we all, but something we say too is when we ask them and then we follow through, and the next time, like you said, we have it, because don't ask them if you're not don't ask anybody if you're not going to come back the next time and show you listened, right? Because there's just so much power in that.
Right. And I think too, that's a great point, because sometimes we feel overwhelmed when we say, okay, I see that 8 students have a need and I've asked them all what they need, and I can only get 5 of those things for the next day. You can still show that you listened to a student by saying, I really tried. I wasn't able to get this, and I'm sorry. And I have a great example of this. On my music room door, have exit slip buttons. So there's buttons that are red, yellow, and green that say like, yes, I don't know, and no. So on the way out, I'll ask them a question or, tell them something, and they'll hit their response. And one day the I don't know button just lost batteries, and I could not find the screwdriver to unscrew that button. And every day my second graders, do you finally find the batteries? What are you doing? Do you need me to go do it? And I hear you, and I'm so sorry. And I looked all through my lunch. I could not find it. I will go home and try again. And so by the end of the year, they're like, you know what, Miss H, I know you looked for it, and I'm sorry. So I'll just say it on the way out. So they would just hit it and go, I don't know. Actually, it was a mistake we learned from, because then we switched the other 2 buttons where they all got to pick a song that represented yes or no for the day. And they got to hit that switch, which was really cool. So you never know what you're going to learn from your little mishaps.
That's so fun.
Yeah.
Awesome. So if someone listening wants to connect with you, learn more about your work, and just learn more about this topic, what would you suggest? How can they reach out?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram. It's at Accessible Classrooms. Used to be the Accessible Music Room, but now I'm doing a little bit more advocacy as the whole. I also have a free store. It's the Accessible Music Room, and you can get to that through my Instagram page. It's in a link tree, so you can access it that way. If you liked what we were talking about with SEL tying into UDL, I did write a chapter in the GIA book, the SEL book from Scott Edgar, that is all about how SEL and UDL go hand in hand. So there's some examples of that, breaking down some of the lessons that teachers gave and showing you from examples of universal design. I also have a couple texts coming out soon about universal design for learning, so keep an eye out. And I have some stories from F-Flat Books on their website that promote access and representation of people with disabilities, as well as just universally designed lessons. I know I am working on one right now that's beatboxing and different ways to teach beatboxing with access in mind. So fun. Lots of things. And also you can always send me an email. I will give you all my email so that you can share that out. Yeah. If you have any questions or just want to chat, I love talking about this stuff. And I'm always happy to give people lesson plans and anything that I have and just talk through anything that you're doing, because oftentimes we're the experts in what we're teaching. I can just give a couple other ideas on how to do that.
Yeah, that's great. We'll make sure that we put all those links in the show notes that people have access to. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for
we loved this.
This was fun.
I'm so glad to be here. I obviously love talking about this stuff. So
yeah.
Thanks for joining us. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode.
We'd also love for you to consider sharing this podcast with a friend and leaving a positive review. That's one of the best ways to get this message to new listeners.